So on its own, it functions again. It's the idea. It's a cylinder. It holds liquid. It's watertight. It meets the requirements, but doesn't meet your own kind of sensibility of visual curiosity, your own design elements that you want to project onto the work. Are they there? Are they things that are interesting and curious looking? Not for me. It just seems like this is, again, that's that first step. So where can we take it? Let's maybe just play with the idea of expanding it. So we went from cylinder with a really simple engagement of pushing into it. Let's take the next step and see if we can just blow it out a little bit and get a little swell, a little bit more volume. I like to use the mud tool ribs because they're great because you can bend them. They're really flexible. So if you want to curve, you can swell it out. You can also use your metal scraper, the one that doesn't have the teeth on it. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to start at the bottom. You can notice that my rib, instead of being vertical, is already at a nice little pitch. I'm going to put a little bit of pressure from the inside out. Basically, just going to start to stretch it out. So with my rib as a guide for the exterior, I'm just going to start to open, 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 open. Gently slow down my pace at the top. Might come in a little bit more. Now it still has that kind of quality of a cylinder, but now it has a little bit more of a swell. It's got a little bit of a breath. It's just kind of opened up. Most of the time I think you're going to find, at least this is my own personal sensibilities, that forms that are not wild and crazy are the easiest to use. They may not be the best and most entertaining things to look at, but when you think about what you're going to be doing with a drinking vessel or a cup, you're going to use it a lot. You're going to be handling it. It's going to be going to the mouth. It's in your hands. You're going to have a lot of engagement time with it. So you don't always want something that's screaming at you at level 10. Sometimes you want something that's a little bit of a whisper, or it's a little more subtle, or something you can live with, and something you feel comfortable using all the time. So maybe that's just this, just a little bit of a swell. But we can do additional things to it without having to stretch and tweak and cut all sorts of wild stuff. I'm going to use my wooden knife again. I'm going to undercut that foot a little bit more, give it a little bit more dynamism. Instead of having to make the top wider in order to make it look visually broader, if I just cut the foot under just a little bit more, it gives that visual contrast. So instead of making the top wider and keeping the foot there, it's easier sometimes just to make the foot narrower, which by perspective makes the top look bigger. So it doesn't take much. But you can see now that that little curve that I had in there starts having more of a round kind of bulbous form. I think it's kind of nice. Narrow foot. Remember, good hair, good shoes, anything in between. It's just gravy, right? So in the end, I think that's kind of a nice little pleasant form. I also I can see a little bit of a hint here because where I was cutting in, it's kind of like a little low shoulder. Pay attention to the form as you're working. Because sometimes you discover these little things that just kind of echo out. You may not intentionally make a shape, but something appears just because of how you handled the tool, what you were doing with it, or just accidentally doing. It's a really great discovery moment sometimes on the wheel where you just look at what happened, not necessarily by intent, but even by accident. I like that little shoulder. It's nice. Instead of being one note of a curve, it's a maybe I want to accentuate that a little more. So as I take my knife in, I'm going to use that edge to create a hard line at the bottom. So look how that profile changes a little bit. Now we have a set of legs to the foot. Nice little kind of shoulder wall here. Nice swell, and then a clean rim. So it's a subtle shaping, subtle form. It's clear, it's clean. Oftentimes that's the best way to go. So in my opinion, it's done. We can leave it as it is. I think it's a good start. A nice handle, maybe a sprig, maybe a lug, be that next step of engagement for design, or we can even push it now. I like asymmetry as well with my forms. Not necessarily I want to make the lip crazy and wild, because you guys have maybe already got the hint of when you have a wild lip, it's going to be a bit of a challenge to do the trimming process when we're working just straight on the wheel head. But sometimes you can play with the midsection, the kind of space in between your rim and foot, and add something that's a little bit more unpredictable. So as the viewer sees it, they don't know what's on the other side. It's this thing that forces them to investigate what's happening here, what's happening there. It's a moment of discovery, it's a moment of curiosity, which again kind of goes towards building an interesting object, interesting interaction between the object, which I believe is the element that makes a really great usable piece of pottery. So I'm just going to make I'm going to give it a belly button, since we're always talking this kind of vernacular of the body, of the foot, the hip, shoulders, lips, legs, shoes, all these things that we associate. I want to give it a belly button. So I'm just going to take my finger, I'm just going to poke it. I'm not just going to stab it because it's going to make an awkward shape, but I'm going to take and make a soft little mark. I'm going to get my hand behind it to back it up so I can keep the space around it in place. I'm just going to go in and give it a belly. Nothing wild, nothing crazy. But we talked about this the other day with our sprigs. It's the idea of having something that's completely symmetrical. It really has no front, no back, because it has no topographical landmark. But even just something as simple as this, now we know where it is. Now it gives a perspective, a front, a back, a side, whatever that is that you may use to engage the form. Maybe you put a handle, the belly comes out. Maybe you put a handle on the side and the belly faces you. Maybe you put another one, or you leave this one as is, and this is a little divot for your thumb, a spot for your thumb to go in. Sort of like a sprig is something, or a lug is something that adds a kind of a grip or a placeholder. Maybe the little divot is something where you naturally go to each and every time. Let's keep it. Let's cut it off. A little bit of water in the front. You guys remember this? Wire tool right underneath. Usually one's good. Two. Make sure you got a little bit of water on your wear board. Push it from the bottom as much as you can. Slide it over. And gently slide it on my wear board. Make sure it uses all the space as we can. Nice little addition.